Is your phone ringing?
Yes, who is it? Everyone's phone is ringing.
Let's picture a moment. A wave of unease sweeps across an entire country, but it's not triggered by a siren or an explosion. Nope, it starts with a sound we all know, the simple ringing of a phone. And on the other end of that call, just one chilling phrase spoken in broken Hebrew. We are coming. This is the digital ghost we're deconstructing today, a message that turned millions of personal phones into instruments of psychological warfare. So let's start at the beginning, with the event itself, the chilling phone call. What exactly went down that day that caused such widespread panic? Well, this thing was massive. We're talking about phones ringing all over the country, from Tel Aviv to Ashdod, Haifa to Beersheba. The caller ID always showed up as unknown. The message was always those two words. The source material notes it was spoken in broken Hebrew with an Arabic accent. And to make things even more terrifying, some people reported hearing the sounds of explosions in the background. Yeah, it became obvious really fast that this was no simple prank call. The sheer scale of it, the perfect timing, it all pointed to something much bigger. This was a coordinated, scientific, and, most importantly, a deeply psychological attack.
Okay, so that's the big question, right? How on earth was this even possible? How do you send the same message to thousands, maybe even millions of phones all at the exact same time?
The answer, according to the source, lies in a system called cell broadcast technology. Now, you gotta understand, this is not your normal text message or phone call. This is a special one-to-many service that governments use for huge national emergencies. Think missile alerts or earthquake warnings. It basically hijacks the cell towers to blast a message out to every single device in a certain area.
And the difference here is absolutely crucial. A normal call needs your specific number. A cell broadcast doesn't care about your number. It targets an entire area, bypassing SIM cards, bypassing the internet. It can even, get this, reach phones that are turned off. This wasn't a simple hack. This was someone getting inside a piece of national security infrastructure.
So what this all boils down to is that the attackers had somehow compromised a state-level emergency alert system. You know, the kind of system that's controlled by the military's home front command. This showed a shocking vulnerability right at the very heart of the country's security setup.
So how'd they do it? Well, the source lays out three main possibilities. One, they got direct access into the core telecom network. Two, they used something called a signal injection attack, which is basically forcing a fake message into the real system. Or three, and this is pretty wild, they created their own fake cell tower to broadcast the message. Any way you slice it, this required some serious technical skill.
Okay, so we've talked about the how, but the really fascinating part of this story might just be the why. Because as it turns out, sometimes the vaguest threat is the most powerful one.
Which brings us to this really interesting psychological puzzle. Why was a simple two-word phrase, "we are coming," so much more terrifying than, say, a very specific bomb threat?
It all comes down to something called the uncertainty principle. Look, if a threat is specific, a bomb is here at 2 p.m. It's scary, for sure, but you can react. You can evacuate people, send in the bomb squad. The fear is focused. But an unknown threat like, "we are coming," well, that's completely different. When, where, how? It's paralyzing, because your own mind starts doing the work, just eating itself with questions you can't possibly answer. The fear just spreads everywhere. So the real goal, it seems, wasn't just to make people afraid. It was to make them feel a complete and total loss of control. The real terror wasn't the attack itself, but that feeling of absolute powerlessness.
And that feeling of helplessness is actually key to understanding this next part, where the source frames this whole event not just as an attack, but as a kind of psychological mirror.
Now, this is where the source material draws a really direct comparison. It talks about the tactic of dropping pamphlets on homes in Gaza, warning people to evacuate. The source states this is often labeled a defense tactic. Then, it puts that right next to the tactic of sending this digital message to Israeli phones, pointing out that this action is labeled terrorism. The source really wants us to think about why two different psychological tactics might get two very different labels.
And all of that thinking is wrapped up in this one really powerful idea from the source. This message was a mirror.
So what does that mean, a mirror? Well, the argument from the source is that this 10-second message was specifically designed to reflect an experience back onto the Israeli population. The goal was to make them feel, even if just for a moment, that constant underlying sense of fear and insecurity that, in the source's view, Palestinians have lived with for decades.
So, where does all this leave us? What's the big takeaway here? Well, it points to a fundamental shift in the nature of conflict. We're in an age where the new battlefield is the human mind.
Think about it. For centuries, war was about things you could see and touch. Tanks, jets, soldiers on the ground. But in this new era, the weapons are often invisible. They're not steel, they're systems, they're signals. And their primary target isn't a building, it's your mind.
So in the end, that two-word message was so much more than just a threat. It was a technical signal. It was a calculated demonstration of power, a way of saying, hey, we're not just here, we're prepared. We've gotten inside your most secure systems. We know exactly where you are.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. In a world where the battlefield is increasingly inside our own heads, and the weapons are invisible signals flying through the air, what is the ultimate defense?